I was 24 years old, sitting at my grandfather's dining table, wearing a dress I'd bought at Goodwill 3 years ago. Around me, my cousins sparkled in designer clothes, their wrists heavy with watches that cost more than my annual rent. The chandelier above us probably cost more than everything I owned combined. My name is Jessica Parker, and I'm about to tell you how one simple question from my grandfather exposed the most devastating betrayal of my life. A betrayal that had been happening right under everyone's noses for 6 years. A betrayal orchestrated by the one person who was supposed to protect me above all others, my own mother. But before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand how I got there. You need to understand what my life looked like while everyone else in my family lived like royalty. While my cousin Brandon drove his BMW to Yale, I took 3 buses to reach the community college 40 minutes from my apartment. While my cousin Ashley posted Instagram photos from Paris and Milan, I was posting job applications, sometimes 50 a day, just hoping one would respond. While they complained about their trust fund distributions being delayed, I was checking my bank account at midnight, calculating if I had enough for both gas and groceries, knowing I could only afford one. My grandfather, Richard Mitchell, made his fortune in real estate development. By the time I was born, he owned half of downtown Seattle and had investments across 3 states. He was the kind of wealthy that didn't just change lives, it built empires. Every grandchild knew that Grandpa Richard took care of family. He paid for private schools, college tuitions, first cars, down payments on houses. He believed in investing in education above all else. Except, apparently, mine. Or so I thought. I worked 3 jobs to pay for community college. In the mornings, I served coffee at a cafe near campus, smiling at customers while my feet ached in shoes with holes in the soles. Afternoons, I attended classes, taking notes until my hand cramped because I couldn't afford a laptop. Evenings and weekends, I worked retail at a clothing store, folding shirts that cost more than my weekly food budget, helping women buy dresses for one night that could have covered my rent for a month. I lived in a studio apartment in the cheapest part of town. The heating barely worked in winter. The air conditioning didn't work at all in summer. Some nights, I was so exhausted from working and studying that I'd fall asleep in my car between shifts, my textbooks spread across the passenger seat, my alarm set for the next job. I never complained. Not once. Because I believed this was just how life worked for some people. My cousins were lucky. I wasn't. That was the hand I'd been dealt. And I was determined to make something of myself anyway, even if I had to do it entirely alone. My mother, Margaret Parker, visited me maybe twice a year. She'd show up in designer sunglasses, carrying bags from Nordstrom, talking about her latest spa weekend, or her new furniture. She'd look around my tiny apartment with this expression, not quite pity, not quite disgust, somewhere in between. Then she'd make some comment about how I should work smarter, not harder, or maybe consider a different path if college is so difficult. She never offered to help. Not financially, not emotionally, nothing. Meanwhile, she'd post photos on Facebook from expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, charity galas. She drove a Mercedes. She lived in a penthouse downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. When I asked her once carefully how she afforded such a lifestyle on her job as a part-time interior decorator, she'd laughed and said, "I'm just good at managing money, Jessica. Maybe you should take some finance classes." The rest of the family rarely reached out. A birthday card here and there. A generic thinking of you text on holidays. But mostly I was invisible. The poor relation. The one who'd somehow failed to launch while everyone else soared. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that struggling now meant I'd appreciate success later. I told myself that earning everything on my own would make me stronger, more independent, more resilient. I had no idea that while I was telling myself these lies to survive, my mother was stealing my future. The dinner invitation came 3 weeks before everything changed. My cousin Brandon was graduating from Harvard Law School, and Grandpa Richard was hosting a celebration dinner at his estate. The invitation was formal, printed on thick cardstock that probably cost more than my textbooks. Family celebration dinner. Dress code, cocktail attire, RSVP required. I almost didn't go. Cocktail attire meant buying something I couldn't afford or wearing something embarrassingly outdated. It meant taking a Saturday off work, losing money I desperately needed. It meant sitting at a table with people who'd made me feel invisible for years. But it was Grandpa Richard. Despite everything, despite the distance and the silence, I loved him. He'd always been kind to me in his quiet way. When I was little, before everything changed, he used to let me sit in his study while he worked, telling me stories about building his business from nothing. He'd ruffle my hair and say, "You've got that Parker determination, Jessica. You're going to do great things." I hadn't heard him say anything like that in years. Maybe I was hoping to hear it again. Maybe I was hoping someone in my family would finally notice how hard I'd been working. Maybe I was just lonely enough to endure one uncomfortable evening for a chance to feel like I belonged somewhere. So I RSVP'd yes. I pulled my old dress from the back of my closet, the one I'd worn to my high school graduation. It still fit, barely. I borrowed shoes from my roommate. I took the bus to within 2 miles of Grandpa's estate, then walked the rest of the way because the bus didn't run out to that neighborhood. I arrived with blisters forming on my heels, my dress slightly wrinkled from the journey, my hair frizzing in the Seattle humidity. The estate looked like something from a magazine. The driveway curved through manicured gardens. The house itself was massive, all glass and stone and modern architecture. Cars lined the circular drive, BMWs and Mercedes and Teslas, each one worth more than I'd earn in 5 years. I walked up to the front door, suddenly feeling every thread of my Goodwill dress, every scuff on my borrowed shoes. Through the windows, I could see my family already gathered, laughing, holding champagne flutes, looking like they'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren advertisement. For a moment, I almost turned around, almost walked back down that long driveway, and caught the bus home. Almost decided that some humiliations weren't worth enduring, even for family. But then the door opened. Grandpa Richard stood there, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Jessica, you made it. Come in. Come in. I'm so glad you're here." The warmth in his voice made my throat tight. When had anyone last been genuinely happy to see me? I stepped inside. I had no idea I was walking into the moment that would change everything. The dining room could have hosted a wedding. A massive table stretched down the center, set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if you breathed on it too hard. Crystal glasses caught the light from that enormous chandelier. Flower arrangements that probably cost hundreds of dollars each served as centerpieces. My family filled the chairs, 30 people in designer clothes, their conversations a blur of vacation plans and investment portfolios and upcoming galas. My cousins Brandon and Ashley sat near the head of the table, flanking Grandpa Richard like golden children. Brandon wore a suit that had clearly been tailored specifically for him. Ashley's dress probably cost more than my monthly rent. I found my seat near the far end of the table. Of course, the poor relation, positioned as far from the guest of honor as possible while still technically being included. Next to me sat Uncle Thomas, my father's brother, who acknowledged me with a brief nod before returning to his conversation about golf handicaps. My mother, Margaret, sat closer to the center of the table. She looked stunning, as always. Her hair was freshly colored and styled. Her dress was elegant, probably designer. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat. When our eyes met across the table, she gave me a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Then she turned away, dismissing me as easily as swatting a fly. Dinner began with speeches. Grandpa Richard stood, his champagne glass raised, talking about Brandon's accomplishments. Harvard Law, top of his class, a job already lined up at a prestigious firm. "I'm so proud to have been able to support your education," Grandpa said, his voice thick with emotion. "Watching you succeed makes every investment worthwhile." Everyone applauded. Brandon stood, giving a speech about gratitude, about family support, about how he couldn't have done it without Grandpa's generosity. He detailed how the education fund had covered not just tuition, but living expenses, study abroad programs, bar exam preparation courses. I listened, pushing food around my plate. The meal was probably incredible, multiple courses of things I couldn't even identify. But everything tasted like ash in my mouth. I was happy for Brandon. Really, I was. But sitting there, listening to him thank Grandpa for opportunities I'd never been offered, made something cold and hard settle in my chest. Why not me? The question I'd asked myself 1,000 times echoed again. What had I done wrong? Why was I the only grandchild left to struggle? Then Grandpa Richard's voice cut through my thoughts. "Jessica." My head snapped up. Everyone was looking at me. 30 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on the poor relation at the end of the table. Grandpa was smiling at me, warm and genuine. "I haven't heard much about your studies lately. You've been so quiet. How are things going at college?" My throat went dry. They're going well, Grandpa. I'm working hard. I'm sure you are. You always were a dedicated student." He leaned forward slightly. "How are you managing the course load? What's your major now? Last I heard, you were interested in education." "Yes, sir. Elementary education. I want to be a teacher." My voice sounded small in that enormous room. Wonderful. Teaching is a noble profession. His eyes were kind, genuinely interested. This was the grandpa I remembered from childhood. And how are you using the education fund I set up for you? I hope you're investing it wisely. Education is expensive these days, but it's the best investment you can make in yourself. The room went completely silent. I stared at him, confused. What fund, Grandpa? The smile on his face froze. What do you mean, what fund? I don't know what you're talking about. My heart started pounding. Around the table, people had stopped eating. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone was watching now, sensing something was about to happen. Grandpa Richard's expression shifted. The warmth drained away, replaced by something sharp and focused. His eyes moved from me to someone else at the table. Following his gaze, I saw my mother. Margaret had gone completely white. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Margaret. Grandpa's voice could have cut glass. Would you like to explain to your daughter what happened to her education fund? The silence in that room was suffocating. My mother's face cycled through emotions, shock to panic to calculation, all in the space of seconds. I watched her, not understanding, my mind struggling to piece together what was happening. Dad, Margaret's voice cracked. This isn't the time or place. I disagree. Grandpa Richard stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I think this is exactly the time and place. I set up an education fund for Jessica 6 years ago when she started college. $850,000, meant to cover her tuition, housing, books, living expenses, everything she needed to focus on her education without financial stress. The same amount I set up for all my grandchildren. The number hit me like a physical blow. $850,000. For me, for my education. Money that could have meant I didn't work 3 jobs. Money that could have meant I slept in a real bed instead of my car. Money that could have changed everything. Where is that money, Margaret? Grandpa's question hung in the air. My mother's hands were shaking now. She set down her glass before she dropped it. Dad, this is a misunderstanding. Jessica and I discussed this. She decided she wanted to work her way through college independently. She said it would mean more if she earned it herself. She refused the money. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a second I almost doubted my own memory. But I had never had any such conversation. I had never refused anything because I had never been offered anything. I never said that. My voice came out stronger than I expected. Mom, I never said anything like that. I didn't even know the money existed. You're confused, sweetie, don't you remember? We talked about this right before you started college. You were so determined to prove yourself. I'm not confused. I stood now too, my legs shaky but holding. I would never refuse almost $1 million when I've been working 3 jobs just to afford community college. When I've been living in a studio apartment with broken heating. When I've been eating ramen for dinner because that's all I can afford. Why would I refuse help if I knew it existed? Around the table, faces showed shock, confusion, and dawning realization. Ashley's hand covered her mouth. Uncle Thomas leaned forward, his expression hard. Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, stared at Margaret like she was seeing a stranger. But it was Grandpa Richard's face that scared me. The anger there was cold and controlled, the kind that came from being absolutely certain of betrayal. Margaret, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I suggest you tell the truth. Where is Jessica's education fund? My mother's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her carefully made-up face, mascara running in black streaks. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. After Jessica's father died, I had nothing. No life insurance, no savings. I had to rebuild from zero. I had expenses, obligations. So you stole from your daughter. Grandpa's words were flat, factual, damning. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. 6 years. You've had 6 years. And in that time, Jessica has struggled and suffered while you've lived in luxury. While you've driven a Mercedes and lived in a penthouse and posted photos from expensive vacations. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly. I'm looking at the account right now. The education fund I set up in Jessica's name. The account she should have had access to on her 18th birthday. He looked up, and the rage in his eyes made my mother flinch. There's less than $3,000 left. You've drained $847,000 over 6 years. That money was supposed to change Jessica's life, and you stole it. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, shocked exclamations, and angry questions. My cousins stared at my mother with disgust. Aunt Carol was crying. Uncle Thomas demanded to know how Margaret had gotten access to an account in my name, but I couldn't hear any of it clearly. There was a roaring in my ears, a pressure building in my chest that made it hard to breathe. $847,000. Stolen. By my own mother. While I worked myself to exhaustion, while I went hungry, while I dreamed of a better life and told myself to be grateful for the scraps I had. I looked at my mother across that table, and I didn't recognize her. This woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, was supposed to love me more than anyone else in the world. She'd looked me in the eye while I struggled. She'd visited my pathetic apartment and made snide comments about my life choices. She'd watched me sacrifice everything, and she'd never said a word. She'd stolen my future and let me believe I simply wasn't worthy of having one. Jessica, honey, please understand. Margaret was standing now, reaching toward me across the table, like she could bridge the distance between us with just her hands. I was going to tell you. I was going to make it right. I just needed a little more time. Time for what? My voice didn't sound like mine. It was cold, distant, like I was hearing someone else speak. Time to spend the last few $1,000s? Time to make sure there was nothing left for me at all? That's not fair. You don't know how hard things have been for me. How hard things have been for you. The laugh that came out of me was bitter and sharp. I've been sleeping in my car, Mom. I've been skipping meals so I could afford textbooks. I've been working 70-hour weeks just to stay afloat. And you've been spending my money on designer clothes and luxury apartments. How hard has that been for you? She had no answer. What answer could there possibly be? Grandpa Richard moved around the table toward me. When he reached me, he pulled me into a hug. And that's when I finally broke. 6 years of holding everything together. 6 years of telling myself I was strong enough to handle anything. 6 years of buried pain and exhaustion and loneliness. All of it came pouring out in gut-wrenching sobs. I'm so sorry, Jessica, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I thought you were getting the money. I thought you were thriving. Your mother sent me updates, photos, told me you were doing wonderfully. I had no idea. I should have checked. I should have reached out to you directly. This is my fault. It's not your fault. I pulled back, wiping my face with the back of my hand. You trusted your daughter. You shouldn't have to verify that your own child isn't stealing from her child. I turned back to face my mother. She was still standing, still crying, but there was something in her eyes now that wasn't remorse. It was calculation. She was already trying to figure out how to minimize the damage, how to spin this in her favor. What else did you lie about? The question came from Aunt Carol, Margaret's own sister. What else have you been hiding? Nothing. I swear this is the only thing. But Grandpa was already scrolling through his phone again. That's interesting, because I'm seeing some other irregularities now that I'm looking closely. Jessica's account wasn't the only one you had access to. You've been listed as a co-trustee on the family trust since your husband died. A courtesy I extended because I thought you might need support. I'm seeing withdrawals from that account too. Substantial withdrawals. The color drained from Margaret's face again. Those were approved expenses. Were they? Let's see. $20,000 to Premier Plastic Surgery, $15,000 to Elite Wellness Spa, $35,000 to Luxury Auto Lease, $60,000 to educational expenses that I now have to assume weren't for Jessica's education. His voice grew colder with each item. Margaret, how much of the family trust have you stolen? I didn't steal anything. I had permission to make withdrawals for legitimate expenses. You had permission to make reasonable withdrawals for your own needs, not to fund a luxury lifestyle while your daughter suffered in poverty. He looked around the table at the rest of the family. I think we need to have a full audit of every account Margaret has had access to. This clearly goes much deeper than Jessica's education fund. My mother's carefully constructed facade shattered completely. You can't do this. You can't humiliate me like this in front of everyone. I'm your daughter. I'm family. You stopped being family the moment you stole from a child. From your own child. Grandpa's words were final. Absolute. Jessica is family. You're just a thief who happens to share my DNA. The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon and Ashley looked uncomfortable, suddenly finding their plates fascinating. Uncle Thomas had his phone out, already making notes. Aunt Carol was openly weeping now, apologizing to me over and over even though she'd done nothing wrong. And my mother just stood there, her designer dress and diamond jewelry suddenly looking like costume pieces, cheap and fake and meaningless. All the luxury she'd built on stolen money was revealed for what it really was. A house of cards built on betrayal. Get out. Grandpa Richard's voice cut through the silence. Get out of my house. You're not welcome here anymore. Dad, please. Let's talk about this privately. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. The only thing we're going to talk about is how much prison time you're facing for embezzlement and fraud. I'll be contacting my attorneys first thing Monday morning. And Margaret? He waited until she looked at him. You're going to pay back every single dollar you stole, plus interest, plus damages. If it takes the rest of your life, you're going to make this right. My mother looked around the table, searching for allies, for someone to defend her. But everyone avoided her gaze. Even her own sister couldn't look at her. She'd burned every bridge in one catastrophic night. Finally, she grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. But she stopped next to me, leaning in close enough that only I could hear her whisper, "You always were selfish, Jessica. I gave you life, raised you, sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay me? By turning everyone against me?" The audacity of it, the sheer twisted logic left me speechless. She actually believed she was the victim here. She'd stolen nearly $1 million from me, sabotaged 6 years of my life, and somehow in her mind, I was the villain for exposing her. I looked her in the eye and said, clearly enough that everyone at the table could hear, "You didn't sacrifice anything for me. You sacrificed me for yourself. There's a difference." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Then she was gone, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the front door slamming behind her. The sound echoed through the house like a period at the end of a sentence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Grandpa Richard squeezed my shoulder gently. "Jessica, we're going to fix this. I promise you, we're going to make this right." I wanted to believe him. But as I stood there in that beautiful dining room, surrounded by family who'd ignored my suffering for 6 years, I couldn't help but wonder, could anything really make this right? Could any amount of money give me back the years I'd lost? The opportunities I'd missed? The person I might have become if I hadn't spent my 20s in survival mode? What happened next would answer those questions, but not in any way I could have predicted. The dinner party dissolved after my mother left. Some family members approached me with awkward apologies and uncomfortable offers of support. Others made quick exits, probably eager to escape the drama. Ashley hugged me, tears in her eyes, whispering that she'd had no idea. Brandon shook my hand formally, like we were business associates, and said he was sorry for my situation. Their sympathy felt hollow. Where had they been for the past 6 years? Why had no one questioned why I was the only grandchild who didn't attend family events, didn't post vacation photos, didn't drive a nice car? The answer was simple. They hadn't wanted to know. It was easier to believe I'd chosen my poverty than to acknowledge that something might be wrong. Easier to enjoy their privilege without examining why I didn't share it. Grandpa Richard asked me to stay after everyone else left. We sat in his study, a room I remembered from childhood, lined with books and smelling of leather and old paper. He poured himself a scotch and offered me one, which I declined. My stomach was still churning. "I need you to understand something," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I had no idea your mother was doing this. Every month I received statements showing the education fund was being used appropriately. Tuition payments, housing deposits, book expenses. I saw withdrawals that matched what I'd expect for a college student. Your mother was sending me photos of you supposedly at campus events, forwarding me emails she claimed were from you, updating me on your progress." He pulled out his phone and showed me. There were photos I'd never seen before. Images that had been manipulated to make it look like I was at a university campus instead of community college. Emails written in a style that sort of sounded like me but wasn't quite right. Even report cards. Fake transcripts showing grades from a 4-year university I'd never attended. "She created an entire false narrative," Grandpa continued. "She told me you were thriving but wanted independence, that you were proud and didn't want family interference. She said you'd asked her specifically not to make a big deal about the fund, because you didn't want your cousins to think you were being treated specially." I stared at the evidence of my mother's deception, this elaborate construction of lies she'd maintained for years. The planning it must have taken, the calculated cruelty of it. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate act born from financial crisis. This was systematic, premeditated theft coupled with gaslighting so thorough that she'd convinced my entire family I'd chosen to struggle. "How did she access the account?" I asked. "It was in my name. How could she withdraw money without my knowledge?" Grandpa's expression turned grim. "After your father died, when you were 17, I set up the education fund. Your mother was listed as co-trustee until you turned 18, at which point control would transfer entirely to you. That was standard for minor beneficiaries. What I didn't know was that she'd forged documents showing you'd agreed to keep her on as co-trustee even after you turned 18. She had access to the account because legally, on paper, you'd given her that access. But I never signed anything. I know that now. I'll be turning over all the documentation to my attorneys tomorrow. This is fraud, Jessica. Criminal fraud. Your mother is going to face serious legal consequences. The thought of my mother in prison should have brought me satisfaction. Instead, I just felt numb, tired, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of her betrayal. What happens now? I asked. Now, we make you whole. Grandpa leaned forward, his expression intense. The fund should have $850,000 in it. It has less than $3,000. I'm going to restore the full amount, plus 6 years of interest it would have earned, plus compensation for the additional expenses you incurred by working multiple jobs instead of focusing on your education. You should never have had to live the way you've been living. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. This happened because I failed to protect you. Your mother was able to steal from you because I didn't verify what she was telling me. I trusted her when I should have checked with you directly. You're not responsible for her choices. No, but I'm responsible for my own. And I chose to believe her lies instead of reaching out to you. When was the last time we talked, Jessica? Really talked? I thought about it. My high school graduation. You gave me a card with $100 in it. You told me you were proud of me. 6 years ago. The pain in his voice was evident. 6 years, and I never once thought to call you myself, to check in personally. I accepted your mother's reports instead of having a relationship with my own granddaughter. That's on me. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the windows, Seattle's city lights glittered against the dark. From here, on this hill in this mansion, the world looked beautiful and orderly. You couldn't see the struggle from up here. You couldn't see the people working 3 jobs or sleeping in their cars or choosing between gas and groceries. There's something else, Grandpa said, pulling out a folder. I had my assistant pull records on your mother's spending over the past 6 years. I need you to look at this. But I warn you, it's going to be difficult. He handed me the folder. Inside were bank statements, credit card bills, receipts. I started reading, and with each page, the knife in my back twisted deeper. $120,000 on a penthouse apartment rental over 3 years, $45,000 on clothing and accessories, $35,000 on plastic surgery and cosmetic procedures, $28,000 on spa treatments and luxury salon visits, $60,000 on vacations, trips to Hawaii, Mexico, the Bahamas, $15,000 on fine dining and entertainment. But the worst items were at the bottom of the stack. $75,000 in cash withdrawals listed as gifts to DC, $30,000 to DC, education fund, another $50,000 to DC legal expenses. Who is DC? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. David Chen. He's a commercial real estate agent your mother has been seeing for the past 4 years. According to the documentation, she's been supporting him financially. The education fund was for his son from a previous marriage. The legal expenses were for his divorce attorney. My mother had stolen my education fund to pay for her boyfriend's expenses. She'd taken the money that was meant to give me a future and used it to fund a relationship with a man I'd never even met. There's more. Grandpa looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Some of the charges indicate she was also taking money from the family trust, as I mentioned. I won't know the full extent until we complete a forensic audit, but preliminary numbers suggest she may have embezzled over $1 million total, possibly more. $1 million. The number was so large, it stopped meaning anything. How do you even conceptualize that kind of theft? That kind of betrayal? I need to know what you want to do, Grandpa said. This is your choice, Jessica. I can handle this privately, force your mother to pay back what she stole, cut her out of the family, or we can involve law enforcement, press charges, take this to court. It's up to you. I thought about my mother's face at dinner, the way she'd tried to make herself the victim. I thought about the 6 years I'd lost, the opportunities that had passed me by, the person I might have been. I thought about every night I'd gone to bed hungry, every morning I'd woken up exhausted, every moment I'd told myself to be grateful for what little I had. And I thought about David Chen's son, whoever he was, getting an education paid for with money that should have been mine, getting opportunities that had been stolen from me. Press charges, I said. I want her held accountable. Not just to me, but to everyone. I want the world to know what she did. Grandpa Richard nodded slowly. You're sure? Once we go down that road, there's no coming back. Your mother will likely face prison time. This will be public, messy. The media might get involved. I'm sure. She made a choice to steal from me. Now she gets to face the consequences of that choice. All right then. He stood, walked to his desk, and made a phone call. I only heard his side of the conversation, but it was clear he was talking to an attorney. Words like criminal fraud, embezzlement, and immediate action floated through the study. When he hung up, he came back and sat down heavily. It's done. The attorneys will file everything Monday morning. The police will probably want to talk to you. Get your statement. This is going to be a difficult process, Jessica. Are you prepared for that? Was I prepared? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. Too many people get away with things because their victims are too tired, too scared, too worn down to fight. My mother had counted on that. She'd counted on me being too beaten down to stand up for myself. She'd underestimated me. I'm prepared, I said. What I wasn't prepared for was everything that would happen after. The storm that was about to consume not just my mother, but the entire family. The secrets that would come spilling out once we started pulling on this thread. The way this one revelation would crack open the foundation and expose rot that had been festering for decades. But that night, sitting in my grandfather's study, I made a promise to myself. Whatever came next, I would face it. I was done being invisible, done being the forgotten grandchild, done accepting scraps and calling it enough. My mother had stolen 6 years of my life. I was about to take them back. The next 3 days were a blur of attorneys, police statements, and forensic accountants. I took time off from all 3 of my jobs, which my managers granted without question once I explained the basics of the situation. Everyone, it seemed, had a story about family betrayal. Everyone understood why I needed to do this. The police detective assigned to my case was a woman in her 50s named Detective Sarah Morrison. She had kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. She recorded my statement in a conference room at the police station, asking detailed questions about my relationship with my mother, my finances over the past 6 years, what I'd known and when I'd known it. This is one of the more clear-cut fraud cases I've seen, she said after we'd finished. Your mother created an elaborate scheme to steal from you over an extended period. The documentation your grandfather provided shows premeditation, ongoing criminal activity, and a pattern of deception. She's going to have a very hard time defending herself. When will you arrest her? I asked. We'll bring her in for questioning tomorrow. Depending on how that goes, we'll likely arrest her within the week. Given the amount of money involved and the risk of flight, we'll be recommending she be held without bail. The thought of my mother in jail should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt sad. This was my mom, the woman who'd raised me, who'd bandaged my scraped knees and helped me with homework and taught me to ride a bike. When had she turned into someone capable of such cruelty? Or had she always been this person, and I'd just been too young to see it? That evening, my phone started ringing. My mother. I stared at her name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button, but something made me answer. Jessica. Her voice was desperate, pleading. Jessica, please, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. Don't do this. Don't destroy your own mother. Think about what you're doing to our family. The audacity of it stole my breath. What I'm doing to our family? Mom, you stole almost $1 million from me. You let me struggle for 6 years while you lived in luxury. You lied to everyone. How dare you try to make this my fault? I was going to pay you back. I just needed time. If you go through with this, if you press charges, I'll go to prison. Is that what you want? To put your own mother in prison? You put yourself there when you committed fraud. I'm begging you, Jessica. Please, drop the charges. We can work this out privately. I'll pay you back, I promise. Just give me a chance. I almost laughed. You've had 6 years of chances. You chose to spend the money instead of doing the right thing. This isn't about revenge, Mom. This is about justice. You committed crimes, and you need to face the consequences. You self-righteous little bitch. Her voice changed, the desperation replaced by venom. You think you're better than me? You think you're some kind of saint because you worked a few jobs and lived in a shitty apartment? You have no idea what I sacrificed for you. What did you sacrifice? Tell me. What exactly did you give up? Everything. I gave up my youth raising you. I gave up my career, my dreams, my whole life. And this is how you repay me? By ruining me? You ruined yourself, and you didn't give up anything for me. You stole from me. You used me. The only thing you sacrificed was your integrity, and apparently you did that a long time ago. You'll regret this. When I'm gone, when you've destroyed me and you have nobody left, you'll realize what you've done. You'll have all that money Grandpa's giving you, and you'll be completely alone with it. Was it worth it, Jessica? Was destroying your family worth the money? You destroyed this family, not me. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt clearer than I had in days. Whatever guilt I'd been carrying, whatever small part of me that had wondered if maybe I was being too harsh, had evaporated. My mother wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She was angry that she'd been caught, and she was trying to manipulate me one last time. It didn't work. The next day, Detective Morrison called to tell me my mother had been brought in for questioning. She'd arrived with an attorney, refused to answer most questions, and maintained that this was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. By evening, she'd been formally arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The bail hearing was set for the following day. Grandpa Richard and I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom. When they brought my mother in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair uncombed and her face bare of makeup, I barely recognized her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her designer armor. Her attorney argued for bail, claiming she wasn't a flight risk and had strong ties to the community. The prosecutor countered with the amount of money involved and evidence that she'd been researching how to flee to countries without extradition treaties. They'd found searches on her computer for non-extradition countries, how to disappear, and starting over with new identity. The judge denied bail. My mother would remain in jail until trial. As they led her out of the courtroom, she looked directly at me. The hatred in her eyes was pure and intense. She mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, but the intent was clear. This was my fault. I'd done this to her. I looked back steadily, refusing to flinch. She'd made her choices. Now she got to live with them. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Somehow, word had leaked about the case. A wealthy family's scandal. A mother stealing from her daughter, nearly $1 million embezzled. The story had everything the media loved: betrayal, wealth, family drama. Grandpa Richard's attorneys had prepared a brief statement. I stood at the microphone, cameras flashing, and read from the paper in my trembling hands. My mother stole $850,000 from an education fund my grandfather established for me. For 6 years, I worked multiple jobs, struggled to afford basic necessities, and sacrificed my education and opportunities while she used my money to fund a luxury lifestyle. I'm pressing charges not for revenge, but because fraud is a crime, and no one should be above the law, not even family. I hope my case will encourage others who've been victimized by people they trust to come forward and seek justice. The questions started immediately, reporters shouting over each other. How did you find out? How does it feel to put your mother in jail? What will you do with the money now? Do you have any message for other victims of family financial abuse? Grandpa's attorneys ushered me away before I could answer any of them. But the story was out now, spreading across local news, then regional, then national. By that evening, I was trending on social media. People had strong opinions, as they always do. Some supported me completely, sharing their own stories of family betrayal and financial abuse. Others called me vindictive, said family matters should be handled privately, accused me of being motivated by greed. A few said I must have done something to deserve it, that good mothers don't steal from their children so clearly I'd been a terrible daughter. I tried not to read the comments, but it was impossible to avoid them entirely. Each opinion felt like a weight, adding to the already crushing pressure of what I was going through. Aunt Carol called me that night. Jessica, I'm so sorry. I had no idea your mother was capable of something like this. Looking back, there were signs. The expensive clothes, the trips, the lifestyle that didn't match her income. But I never imagined she was stealing, especially not from you. No one wants to believe their sister is a criminal, I said. That's not an excuse. I should have paid more attention. We all should have. The whole family failed you, sweetheart. We let you struggle alone while we enjoyed our comfortable lives. That's on us. The apology felt genuine, but it didn't change the past. Still, it was something. More than most of the family had offered. Over the next week, more details emerged. The forensic audit of the family trust revealed that my mother had stolen even more than we'd initially thought. The total was closer to $1. $3 million when you included money she'd taken from other family accounts that Grandpa had access to. She'd been incredibly careful, taking amounts small enough not to trigger immediate alarms, spreading the theft across multiple years and accounts. But she'd gotten greedy. The education fund had been too tempting, too large, too easy to access. That's what had finally exposed her. David Chen, her boyfriend, was interviewed by police. He claimed he'd had no idea where the money was coming from, that Margaret had told him she'd received an inheritance. The investigators weren't sure if they believed him, but without evidence, he'd knowingly participated in the fraud, They couldn't charge him. He did, however, agree to cooperate with the investigation. From him, we learned more about my mother's double life. She'd told David she was a successful interior designer with wealthy clients. She'd implied she came from money, that her father was rich and indulgent. She'd presented herself as sophisticated, cultured, generous. He'd believed he'd won the lottery, meeting a beautiful, wealthy woman who doted on him and his son. The irony was thick. She'd created a whole false identity to impress a man, using stolen money to play the role of someone she wasn't. And I'd worked 3 jobs just to survive while she played dress-up with my future. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Until then, my mother remained in jail. Her attorney filed motions, tried to suppress evidence, argued technicalities. None of it worked. The case against her was airtight. Meanwhile, Grandpa Richard was handling the financial restoration. He'd already deposited the full $850,000 back into my education fund, plus $127,000 in calculated interest it would have earned. He also gave me an additional $200,000 as compensation for the wages I'd lost working multiple jobs instead of focusing on school, and for the emotional distress and lost opportunities. Suddenly, I had over $1.1 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Money that could change my entire life. But what was I supposed to do with it? I was sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at the bank statement on my laptop, when my roommate came home. Jen was a nursing student, working as many hours as I did, struggling just as hard. We'd bonded over our shared exhaustion and mutual support through impossible schedules. "You okay?" she asked, seeing my expression. I told her everything. The whole story poured out, from the dinner revelation to the arrest to the money now sitting in my account. She listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to quit all my jobs, enroll in a real 4-year university, finally have the college experience I should have had. But part of me feels like that money is cursed somehow, like using it makes me complicit in what she did." "That's survivor's guilt talking," Jen said gently. "This money was always meant for you. It was stolen from you. Taking it back isn't wrong. It's justice. And using it the way it was intended, for your education and your future, that's not being complicit. That's claiming what was always rightfully yours." She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are 2 different things. Over the next few days, I started making plans. Real plans. Not the desperate scrambling that had defined my life for years. I researched universities, looked at programs in education, calculated costs. I could afford not just tuition, but housing, books, everything. I could be a full-time student. I could have the experience I dreamed about. I could finally stop struggling just to survive. But before I could move forward, I had to see one thing through. I had to face my mother in court and make sure justice was served. Not just for me, but for everyone she'd hurt. For every person who'd ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. The preliminary hearing arrived faster than I expected. I walked into that courtroom with Grandpa Richard beside me, my head high, my resolve steady. My mother was already seated at the defense table, her attorney whispering to her. She looked thinner, paler, the jail time already showing on her face. When the judge entered, we all stood. The charges were read: multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, forgery. Each charge carried years of potential prison time. Together, she was looking at decades behind bars. Her attorney entered a plea of not guilty. I wasn't surprised. She'd never once admitted she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, she was the victim here, persecuted by an ungrateful daughter and a judgmental family. The judge set a trial date 3 months out and reviewed the conditions of her continued detention. No bail, no special privileges. She would remain in custody until the trial concluded. As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt my mother's eyes on me. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. The betrayal was complete, the relationship destroyed beyond any hope of repair. She'd made her choice, and now she would live with the consequences. In the hallway, Detective Morrison approached me. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually." "Good. I want you to know we're building an incredibly strong case. Between your grandfather's documentation, the forensic accounting, and the digital evidence of her planning and deception, I don't see any way she avoids conviction. You should prepare yourself for a guilty verdict." "I am prepared. That's why I'm doing this." She smiled, a rare expression of approval. "You're braver than most victims I work with. A lot of people would have taken the money and tried to move on, avoided the trauma of a public trial. But you're standing up for what's right. That matters. Her words stayed with me as I drove home that evening. Was I brave? I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, sad, and angry all at once. But maybe that was what courage looked like sometimes. Not the absence of fear or pain, but the decision to keep moving forward despite it. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I allowed myself to dream. Not small, practical dreams about making rent or passing a class. Big dreams. Dreams about traveling, about studying abroad, about becoming the teacher I'd always wanted to be. Dreams about a life where I wasn't constantly in survival mode. Dreams about the person I could become now that I'd finally broken free from the weight of my mother's betrayal. The next morning, I quit 2 of my 3 jobs. I needed to keep one for structure and spending money, but I didn't need to work 70 hours a week anymore. I enrolled in a state university for the fall semester, choosing their education program, one of the best in the region. I found a small but nice apartment near campus, nothing fancy, but clean and safe with heating that actually worked. I started building the life I should have had all along, but I wasn't the only one whose life was changing. The ripples from my mother's arrest spread through the entire family, exposing secrets and lies that had been buried for years. What I didn't know yet was that my mother's crimes were just the beginning. The truth about our family was far darker than anyone had imagined, and I was about to learn exactly how deep the rot went. 3 weeks after my mother's preliminary hearing, Aunt Carol called me. Her voice was shaking. "Jessica, can you come to my house? There's something you need to know. Something about your father." My father, Thomas Parker, had died in a car accident when I was 16. Or at least, that's what I'd always been told. He'd been driving home late from work, lost control on a wet road, and crashed into a tree. Instant death. A tragic accident. "What about him?" I asked, my stomach already knotting with dread. "I can't tell you over the phone. Please just come." An hour later, I sat in Aunt Carol's living room, a cup of tea I wasn't drinking cooling in my hands. She looked like she'd aged years in the past few weeks, the stress of our family's scandal written in new lines around her eyes and mouth. "After Margaret was arrested," she began, "I started thinking about the past, about patterns of behavior, about things that never quite made sense." She pulled out an old photo album, flipping to a picture of my father. He looked young, happy, smiling at the camera with me on his shoulders. I was maybe 5 years old in the picture. "Your father was a good man, Jessica. He adored you, and he was starting to have problems with your mother." "What kind of problems?" "Money problems. About a year before he died, he came to me worried. He said Margaret was spending beyond their means, that there were charges on credit cards he didn't recognize, that money was disappearing from their accounts. He confronted her, and she told him he was being controlling, that she deserved nice things after years of sacrifice. They fought about it constantly." I leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this now?" Aunt Carol's hands trembled as she pulled out another document. "Because after Margaret was arrested, I started going through old family papers, and I found this. It was a life insurance policy for my father, listing my mother as the sole beneficiary. The payout amount, $500,000. "She told everyone there was no life insurance," I said slowly. "She said Dad hadn't updated his policy, that it had lapsed." "I know, that's what she told all of us. She said she was left with nothing, that she had to start over from scratch. We all felt terrible for her. The family helped her out financially, helped her get back on her feet. But Jessica, if she collected this insurance money, where did it go?" The implications were staggering. If my mother had received $500,000 from my father's death and then claimed to have nothing, where had that money gone? And why lie about it? "There's more," Aunt Carol said. I started digging into the accident. I pulled the police report, talked to the investigators. Your father's car accident happened on a clear night, not a rainy one. The road was dry. He was stone-cold sober. The investigators at the time noted it was strange that an experienced driver would lose control on a straight stretch of road with no obstacles, but they ruled it an accident because there was no evidence of anything else. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we should look closer at how your father died. Maybe it wasn't an accident." The room seemed to tilt. "You think my mother killed him?" "I think she had motive. He was about to expose her financial abuse. He was talking about divorce, about taking custody of you. And then suddenly he's dead, she collects a huge insurance payout, and she tells everyone she's broke. Jessica, we need to tell the police." I couldn't breathe. My father. My dad who'd died when I was 16, leaving me with nothing but memories and a mother who'd stolen my future. If Aunt Carol was right, if my mother had somehow caused his death, then the betrayal went deeper than I'd ever imagined. We don't have proof, I said. This is all speculation. Then we get proof. We demand the case be reopened. We hire investigators. We find the truth. Aunt Carol grabbed my hand. Jessica, if Margaret murdered your father, she needs to pay for that too. We can't let her get away with it. I thought about my father's face in that photo, his smile, the way he used to call me his little scholar. So proud when I brought home good grades. I thought about how different my life might have been if he'd lived. Would he have stopped my mother from stealing? Would he have protected me? Okay, I said. Let's find out what really happened. Detective Morrison was skeptical when we brought her the information. I understand your concerns, but reopening a case from 8 years ago based on suspicions and financial motives is difficult. We'd need new evidence. So investigate, I said. Look at her finances after my father died. See where that insurance money went. Look at the accident scene again with fresh eyes. If there's nothing there, fine. But if there's something, don't you owe it to my father to find out? She sighed. I'll see what I can do. But I need you to understand, even if we do find evidence of wrongdoing, getting a conviction on a case this old will be incredibly difficult. Witnesses' memories fade. Evidence degrades. Trails go cold. I understand, but I need to know the truth. Over the next month, while my mother sat in jail awaiting trial for fraud, a cold case detective began reviewing my father's accident. They interviewed the original investigators, examined the car that had been in storage, and most importantly, followed the money trail from the insurance payout. What they found was damning. My mother had received the $500,000 insurance payment 2 weeks after my father's death. Within 6 months, she'd spent nearly all of it. $70,000 on a new car, $50,000 on renovations to our house, $30,000 on clothing and jewelry, multiple cash withdrawals totaling over $100,000. The money had vanished like water through her fingers. But there was more. The cold case detective discovered that my father had filed for divorce 3 days before he died. The papers had been drawn up, but not yet served. In those papers, he detailed my mother's financial abuse, requested full custody of me, and demanded a forensic accounting of their marital assets. And here was the smoking gun. The life insurance policy had been updated 6 months before his death, increasing the payout and listing my mother as the sole beneficiary. My father hadn't made that change. His signature on the update forms didn't match his signature on other documents. An expert examined it and determined it was forged. My mother had increased her own life insurance payout, forged my father's signature, and then, 3 days after he filed for divorce that would have exposed her financial crimes, he conveniently died in a single car accident that had always seemed suspicious. The car itself provided the final piece of evidence. Stored in a police impound lot for years, it was examined by a new team of mechanics and accident reconstruction experts. They found evidence that the brake lines had been partially cut, not enough to fail immediately, but enough to fail catastrophically when pressure was applied at high speed. My father hadn't lost control of his car. His brakes had been sabotaged. He'd been murdered. When Detective Morrison called to tell me they were adding murder charges to my mother's case, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in my new apartment, the one my stolen education money was now paying for, and felt everything inside me turn to ice. My mother hadn't just stolen my future. She'd stolen my father. She'd killed him to cover up her crimes and collected $500,000 for doing it. And then she'd spent the next 8 years stealing from me, too, bleeding me dry while I grieved for a father she'd murdered. The trial, when it finally happened, was a media circus. The case had everything: family drama, fraud, a cold case murder, a daughter testifying against her mother. Court TV wanted to broadcast it. Podcasters wanted to cover it. The public couldn't get enough of the story. I testified for 6 hours over 2 days. I told the jury everything, from my years of struggle to the moment at dinner when I'd learned about the stolen education fund. I described my mother's lies, her manipulation, her complete lack of remorse. The prosecutor walked me through evidence, bank statements, forged documents, emails. But the hardest part was testifying about my father, about the man I'd lost, about looking at the evidence that my mother had murdered him and realizing I'd been living with his killer for years, never knowing the truth. My mother's defense attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, as a daughter with a grudge exaggerating normal family conflict. But the evidence was too strong. The paper trail, too clear. The forensic experts, too credible. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts of fraud and embezzlement. Guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. My mother was given life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, plus an additional 25 years for the fraud charges. She would die in prison. As they read the sentence, I watched her face. She didn't cry. She didn't show remorse. She just looked at me with pure hatred. Like even now, even facing life in prison for murder, she believed she was the victim and I was the villain. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I stood and walked to the microphone, my prepared speech in my shaking hands. My mother stole my education, my opportunities, and my father, I began. She murdered him to hide her crimes, then spent years stealing from me too. She looked me in the eye while I struggled and never once felt guilty. She only felt entitled. Entitled to his insurance money. Entitled to my education fund. Entitled to live in luxury while I suffered. The saddest part is that she'll never understand what she's done wrong. She'll go to prison believing she's been wronged, that I somehow betrayed her by demanding justice. But I didn't put her in prison. Her choices did. Every crime she committed, every life she destroyed, every dollar she stole, those were her decisions. And now she gets to live with the consequences. I folded my paper and looked directly at her. I hope you have a very long life to think about what you've done. And I hope every single day of that life you remember that you did this to yourself. Then I walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. 6 months later, I stood in front of a classroom of second graders at a public elementary school in Seattle. I'd finished my degree, accelerated through with the help of summer classes, and my complete focus now that I didn't have to work multiple jobs. I'd graduated with honors and landed a teaching position at a school in a low-income neighborhood, a place where kids needed someone who understood struggle. On my desk was a photo of my father, young and smiling, holding me on his shoulders. Next to it was a photo of me and Grandpa Richard from my graduation, both of us beaming at the camera. My mother's crimes had torn our family apart, exposed rot that went back years, ended multiple relationships, and destroyed the image of the perfect wealthy family we'd all pretended to be. But from that destruction, something new was growing. Grandpa Richard and I talked weekly now. Really talked, not just surface pleasantries. He'd created new education funds for several children of single mothers in financial distress, saying he wanted to make sure no other grandchild fell through the cracks the way I had. Aunt Carol had started a nonprofit supporting victims of financial abuse by family members, using my case as an example of why it's important to speak up and seek justice. My cousins Brandon and Ashley both reached out with genuine apologies and offers of friendship. We were slowly building relationships based on honesty instead of the false pretenses we'd all been raised with. And me? I was teaching. Every day I worked with kids who came from situations like mine, kids who didn't have much, who struggled, who needed someone to believe in them. I told them stories about determination and perseverance, though I didn't tell them my own story. That wasn't appropriate for 7-year-olds. But I lived the lessons I taught. Work hard. Be honest. Stand up for yourself. Don't let anyone make you believe you're less than you are. My mother had tried to steal my future. Instead, she'd inadvertently given me purpose. Because I knew now what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, left to struggle alone. And I was determined that none of my students would ever feel that way. 3 years after the trial, I got a letter from my mother. It was the first communication I'd had from her since her sentencing. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened. But curiosity won out. The letter was short. It didn't apologize. It didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, it was full of justifications and blame. She claimed the justice system had failed her, that I had destroyed her life with lies, that she was the real victim in all of this. Even after years in prison, even after being convicted of murder and fraud, she still couldn't acknowledge what she'd done. I read it once, then threw it away. Some people never change. Some people are so broken inside that they'll never be able to see their own culpability, their own failures, their own cruelty. My mother was one of those people, but I wasn't. I'd been shaped by her betrayal, yes, but not defined by it. I'd survived. I'd fought back. I'd claimed my future from the wreckage she'd made of my past. And every day, standing in front of my classroom, seeing my students' faces light up when they understood a new concept, when they achieved something they didn't think they could, I knew I'd made the right choice. Justice had been served, not just in a courtroom, but in the life I was building, the person I was becoming, the legacy I was creating. My mother stole $850,000 from me. She murdered my father. She tried to destroy my life. She failed. I took back what was mine, not just the money, but my power, my voice, my future. And in doing so, I proved something important. That betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. That fighting back isn't vindictive, it's survival. That justice, real justice, isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to let evil people get away with their evil acts. It's about standing up and saying, "No more. You don't get to do this. You don't get to hurt me anymore." And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.